Okay. Next we have Haneen. How do you know when your niche is specific enough? So Nanine, where are you calling in from?
Hey, I'm calling in from Mexico.
So welcome. We
Thank
got
you.
some. Are you at a restaurant?
Sorry?
Are you out at a restaurant or somewhere?
I am, yes. Is it terrible quality? Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, but maybe if you can mute yourself because it's pretty loud.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay, so there's this question: how do you know when your niche is specific enough? Obviously, there's such a thing as too broad. I help everybody with everything in every way. That's how you destroy a business, trying to be everything to everybody. But then there's way too narrow. I work with single women of Basque French descent who have this condition, who eat a vegan diet, who are big Star Trek fans. Like you can get it so specific that there's only one person in the world who fits that description. So that's too narrow. And so we're trying to find the sweet spot. And so one lever or sort of factor in this is, are you going local or global? If you're on the internet, you want to go much more narrow. If you are on in a city locally, then you're going to want to be a bit more broad. If you're in a small town, you've got to be broader still. If you're in a town of 100 people, you sort of have to be a generalist. You just got to do a bunch of things because there isn't a population base to support your specialization. So that's one factor. But assuming you're working online, I imagine. Yeah. Okay. So then there's a lot more, not just more room, but more mandate to narrow. So let's just say this: there are 3 criteria of a good target market, and these questions have a lot to say about how clear it is. Number 1, the bottom line is anyone you're speaking to should know if they're in that group or not. That's the first thing. When they hear it, there shouldn't be any fuzziness. If I were to ask you all, can you, in a sentence or 2, tell me just who you're trying to help? We should all instantly know yes or no. There should be no, maybe, let me ask more questions. We should just know. Number 2, there's enough of them who can afford to pay you full price. So if you can't find enough of them who can afford to pay you full price, you've gone too narrow. That's really important. Because you might want to help refugees, and it's like, oh, they could use some life coaching, and probably, I don't know, maybe that'd be helpful for them. But are they going to pay you? Probably not. So if they're not going to pay you, how are you going to sustain yourself? And now you have a nonprofit. You do fundraising, great, different model. But if it's a business, there need to be enough of those people who can afford to pay full price. And third, can you find them? Meaning, are there hubs? And if you can't find any hubs, it means it's not the right size of niche. It's either so broad that there's no hubs for everybody, or it's so narrow, there's no, so those are the things I'd be looking at is, can I find these people? Because if you can't find any hubs, if you're asking around, people are like, no, I can't think of anywhere else, and you shake the tree quite a bit and nothing falls out, it may be obvious from looking at it, whether it's too broad or too narrow, or you've got it wrong. And the other thing is there's 4 levels of who we're trying to reach, of a target market or an ideal client. And if you imagine like a target, the bullseye is worth 1,000 points. The ring out, 100 points. The next ring out, 10 points. The next ring out, 1 point. The bullseye for 1,000 points is what's the issue they're struggling with. That's the thing we want to have the most clarity on, what I would call island A and island B. What are their symptoms? What are they craving? If you can nail that, you get 1,000 points. And the other ones really don't matter as much. The next ring out from that are the psychographics. So the psychographics are the kind of the internal things things you can't see from the outside, like what communities are they a part of? What scenes do they belong to? What affinity do they share with people? What are their kind of core beliefs and values, which they would also share with other people? And this is huge because people gather based on psychographics much more than they do demographics, which is the next ring, which are just the outside things. You know, you're black, you're white, externally verifiable. You're rich, you're poor. We can look into your bank account and your holdings, and we can tell. All of these things are externally your habits. We can tell your habits externally. But those don't tell you much about, well, they can indicate they're correlative, but not, you know. And then the last thing is, what are the qualities? They're nice people, they're responsible, they're. So the thing we really want clarity on is the issue. Now, did you get, like, are you getting too specific about the issue? Maybe, but that's where my focus is that clear enough? And maybe you get too clear, but I'll tell you what, like there was an herbalist who was on a call with me. Well, she's on this call here. It's and she works with I think it's Hashimoto's thyroiditis. She picked that as the issue. Herbalism plus Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Yeah, that's Chris George there. Hey, Chris. And I don't think that's too narrow if you're global. Now, if it was, I work with, it's herbalism plus Hashimoto's thyroiditis for people living in North Carolina who are Democrats, and you know, you start to add too much, maybe then it's too narrow. But if you pick the issue, you're probably okay as long as there's enough people. So that's the theory I wanted to give. That's the kind of the question you asked is, how do you know? So that's how I would know. But do you want to share with us maybe the target market you're thinking about?
Thank you for that. Super helpful. I'm a sex and intimacy coach. So the target market I'm zeroing in on is to help people liberate themselves from the impossible performance standards of sex, and the scripts and the baggage, and help them to rewrite their own sex story, so to help them feel like, oh my God, here's the whole buffet of options that you have available to make sex feel joyful and light.
Now, do your people come to you saying, boy, I've got impossible standards around this? No, okay. So this is important, because this is another thing we think sometimes, oh, is this too specific and niche? But we're actually talking about something that's not niche. So we got to put things in the right bucket. What you just described is point of view. What you've described is diagnosis, not symptoms. So, you know, let's say somebody will come to you and they'll just say, well, things aren't working out in my sex life. And through the conversation, you say, you know, what's really going on? You think it's about technique, or you think it's about you're just not a good lover, or you're broken somehow. But actually what's going on is you have these insane standards, and that's having these knock-on effects. And then they think about it and they say, oh my God, that's really true. And then you can help them. So for everybody, this is so important, because this happens a lot. We confuse diagnosis for symptoms. How do we know which is which? If it's ever, this is what you need, if that's a diagnosis. You need to overcome your old sales scripts and unrealistic expectations. That's a prescription. That's a diagnosis. That's your point of view about their situation, but it's not their situation. Their situation is that they, whatever it is. And the way we get to this, by the way, is we say, okay, in this case, if somebody had impossible standards around sex, if they had all these scripts, what are the symptoms they would likely experience fairly predictably? And we make a list of those. And then what you may find is that there may be a bunch of them. Yeah. And you can go through it. And now you could just say, hey, does your sex life have these symptoms? Blah, 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 and give a bunch of symptoms. Ultimately, what we're going for is a headline. That's something a little punchier. So it's worth really, because we got to establish relevance. That's the very first thing. Once we have their attention, They notice us, they're on our website, they're looking at us. We have to establish relevance. And so we're going for like a one sentence something that they would read and say, that's me. Not, that's cool. Glad you're out there. That work seems very fascinating. What got you started? You know, that's not what we want. We want, that's me. So we've got to hone in. So you can look over those issues, the symptoms that would happen if they had those impossible standards. And then it's just a matter of like, okay, which one is the big one for my people? And this, there may be other people who focus on other symptoms, but like, the big symptom for my people would be XYZ. That they feel broken. That's the main one I hear. So it's, you know, one of the ways we can get to the symptoms too. Imagine you're at the bar and you're with a friend of yours who is suffering from these crazy expectations and scripts and all this. And that's going on in their life. And they've really hit a breaking point in their relationships and their sex life. And you're at the bar, you've had a few beers each, and you look at them and you say, what's going on in your life? Like you said you wanted to meet. And then they talk about that. And they just say, oh my God, it's just, what do they say? What comes pouring out of them? It's late. They're drunk. Their vocabulary's got, there's no smart thought. It's just the raw, honest, ugh, this is what it is. That's the headline. Or another way to say it is that I just want, or like, I just is often the way it comes out. I'm just sick of this. I just want this. It's so, it comes down to like 3 words often, 7 words at the most. Like, I just hate this sleazy marketing. I just want marketing to feel good. You know, it's that. Like 1-syllable words, nickel words, more than 50-cent words are better here. Does that help at all? And does anything come up for you as I was talking?
That was mega helpful. Yeah, it's funny, I did do the market research and I got all those symptoms as you said. It was like shrinking myself in my relationship. I don't know what I want, or I'm scared of talking to people about what I've been flirting. You know, just like there was a bunch of words that came out because they were all kind of different. I didn't know how to generalize. I wanted to capture all of them. And so now what you're saying is like, okay, pick the thing, right? What's the one thing that like kind of unites the main crux? This is what I have to sit with. And that feels like a hard.
Yes, amen. That's the thing to keep digging into. And a question you can be asking people is like, what was the breaking point for you? Like when you finally were like, I have to deal with this. This isn't a should, this is a must now. What happened? And you're just listening for, another way to do this, by the way, that can be so helpful is think about it metaphorically, because the particular circumstances may vary from person to person, but metaphorically, it may be the same thing. Like here's an example. This happened in a puttering session. I'm going to do a video about this in the coming weeks, but she helped people with chronic and persistent pain, in body pain, that just wasn't going away. And we started talking about metaphors, and I said, what is it like? Is it like because I feel like they're trapped. There's something in that. Like, is it they're in a dungeon, they're in a jail cell, are they? And I give her a couple of minutes to think about it, and she said, it's like they're dragging a rock behind them. That's what it is. They're shackled to this heavy stone. It's not that they can't go anywhere. It's just that it's a lot of work to go somewhere because they always have this stone and they can't get rid of it, which has them not want to go out much. So you see what I'm saying? As soon as you get that, you think, oh, I get it. Metaphorically, I completely understand what you're dealing with. But then the next question I said is, and who are you in that metaphor? And she just said, I have this image of like the rock gets taken and it's put in a shopping cart that you can push around with you. Aha. So what's beautiful about this is it's not like I cut the chain and the rock is gone. No, the rock is still there. The pain may be, and I asked her, I said, if you had an ideal client who was just perfect, like just in the right place, ready to do the work, what percentage reduction in pain do you feel comfortable to guarantee? She's like, oh, about 60%, which was higher than I thought. I was like, that's actually pretty amazing. So it's like, yeah, so it's like half the weight, this stone now. So twice as much as or more is possible in their life. So I thought that was interesting. And then I said, but what if it wasn't a stone? And what if it wasn't a shopping cart? What if it was an old man and they were put in a wheelchair? And what if this wasn't something they lugged around resentfully, but they pushed around with love? You know, and instead of resenting that old man, they cared for that old man. Yeah, so the metaphor began to develop. And so the beauty of this is a fewfold. One, if you use the right metaphor for your work, people instantly like that. So if you say, does your sex life feel like this metaphor? Does it feel like an audition that you're constantly never getting the part for? Does it feel like, I don't know what it would be, but I would recommend just coming up with 20 metaphors and asking your people, like, what is it like metaphorically for you in your sex life? And you start to get a flavor, and then you pick one, but you could use multiple. But then in a workshop, this is so powerful because first of all, that could be the title of the workshop somehow, or you start off with that, like, hey, raise your hand if it feels like this, and they all say, holy shit, yeah, it does. Then you say, okay, so in this case, you could say, here's what that old man is. That old man is your chronic pain. Here's what that chain is. Well, that chain is all the patterns that are keeping you bound to this pain. And some of them we can do something about, and some of them we can't. And the wheelchair, these are all the tools that we're going to use. And this is what it is like to have support. And then I also said, you know, you can really dig in and nerd out with the wheelchair. Like, what are the wheels? What's the chair? What are the brakes? Like, all of those could have something in her work. And then she would be making a case for the wheelchair, not for her. She's not saying, hey, hire me into a workshop. She's saying, if you have chronic pain, stop dragging this old man through the gravel behind you and making him hurt worse. Instead, we get a wheelchair. And here are the constituent parts of a wheelchair. And she had a number. What were they? I'm like, hey, you're going to need help. You're going to need space. There's nutrition. There's a number of things that go into building this kind of a wheelchair. So whether you hire me or not, this is what you want. So for anyone really struggling with like a headline or how to articulate it, just consider a metaphor. And if you go to my website, marketingforhippies.com, and just search in the search bar metaphors or metaphor, I have a fairly robust article about this. Anyways, I took a little longer on that because I know this is something that's helpful for a lot of folks. So hopefully that's useful to you.
Super useful. Thank you so much, Ted. Thank you.
You're welcome.